Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on energy innovation and technology. I'm Markus Wråke. My day job is as a CEO of Energiforsk. But today I'm the host here with a fantastic set of guests. And with me here in the studio in Stockholm, I have Robert Andrén. You are the Director General of the Swedish Energy Agency. And also, you are here as the chairperson of the North European Energy Perspectives Project, which actually is co-hosting this event. So this event is part of a research project. I have Anders Egelrud. You are the CEO of Stockholm Exergi, one of the main utilities here in Sweden, and certainly the biggest one here in Stockholm. Jenny Larsson, you are the CEO of Hitachi ABB Powergrids.
Yes.
Long name. You're also very welcome. And with us from Paris, joining us there, we have Mechtil Wörsdörfer. You are the Director of Sustainability, Technology and Outlooks at the International Energy Agency. Very welcome to you. And we also have Julia Renaud from Breakthrough Energy, which I'm very curious actually to hear more about. I think a lot of people are not so familiar with Breakthrough Energy here, at least here in Sweden. So thank you all for taking the time out of your busy calendars. And of course, thank you all for joining us from your office or your home or wherever you are watching this webinar. Before this webinar, we asked you, when you signed up, to provide us with the questions that you had for our panel. And we've been absolutely overwhelmed by the response. We've received many really good questions, and I'll do my best to pick up on some of them. We also have a live chat connected to this webinar. Hopefully you'll see it in your computer window. And you're very welcome to comment on what's being said in the panel here in the room and from Paris. And of course also post questions to the panel. I'll try and do my best to pick them up as we go, and perhaps also comment on each other's interventions. So use that as a sort of a live discussion forum on this. So I'd like to sort of open with a pretty broad question to you, Robert, given the current situation with the COVID-19 pandemic. How worried should we be that countries are now reducing their ambitions in terms of clean energy and climate change mitigation?
Oh, it's a difficult question to answer, actually. But I think that what we have seen in the key countries driving the transition, quite the contrary, that they actually are saying that we need to make an even quicker move into the more sustainable society, a more sustainable energy system, a more sustainable way of going about business and thinking about economy. So I think that actually this will perhaps help the transition in order to deal with the climate change problem that we have.
Yeah, is that also true for the Swedish government, or is it sort of a broad picture?
No, I think that the signals we have received so far has been that they see the potential. Now we will have the budgetary bill on Monday delivered by the government. So I'm very excited to see what they actually are proposing. I'm more worried that we are not doing even more, have high ambitions in that bill. I would say that in research and innovation, and also in some other with some other tools, we need to make a real effort this time, despite the COVID-19 situation.
So what about Mechtil Wörsdörfer from the IEA? You of course you have a 30 member countries that go beyond the European context. Do you sort of share this rather optimistic view that Robert sort of gives us now?
So thank you, Markus, and happy to participate and react. So first of all, we are a global institution or agency. So we cover the 30 OECD members from the US to Korea, Japan, 22 Europeans. But we also work a lot with India, China, some African countries. So I think the picture is a little bit different if we look globally. First of all, the COVID-19 has impacted the energy sector, energy demand heavily. I mean, we haven't seen that historically since 70 years or something. So energy demand is expected to go down by 6%, CO2 emissions by 8% globally. which is not good news in a sense, because it will most likely only be temporary. So we need to do more to keep that running. And another sign, which is quite worrying, is that investments in energy sector have gone down or will go down, even though there are some differences, by 20%. So I think the signals or the situation globally where governments are is quite worrying, and there's a lot of uncertainty. So when it comes to the question how to go out of it and the recovery, I think for the richer countries, and Sweden, and Robert is right there, there's a lot of optimism that we come out, we invest a lot, the sustainable recovery plans in Europe and in Sweden will hopefully at least maintain, if not increase, R&D spending. We have seen that in the previous crisis, 2008, 2009, where the richer countries have even increased their R&D budget, which helps to go out of the crisis and all the good benefits. But that's not true globally. The poorer countries, the emerging economies, they will struggle much, much more to go out of COVID. So I think that it's a bit more mixed picture, because those who don't have the money to invest, I think there is a risk that this will bring them deeper in the crisis and not on the way we would like to go.
Thanks, Mechthild. Turning to you, Julia Reynaud at Breakthrough Energy, your perspective is quite different, of course, compared to this governmental view that we just heard. Has the pandemic forced you to think differently about what you do? And because your mission is to sort of accelerate the scaling up of the technologies that we need. Has the pandemic forced you to think differently about how to do that?
Markus, let me just perhaps start by giving a few words on what Breakthrough Energy is, just to make sure that everyone understands the perspective that I bring, and then I'll be happy to answer the perspective on your question. So Breakthrough Energy is a network of entities and initiatives, and it includes investment funds, and I can talk to that, and efforts that are all linked by the common commitment that we need to scale and accelerate the technologies in order to achieve the path to net zero emissions by 2050. So the genesis of Breakthrough Energy was on the margins of COP21, where global leaders launched Mission Innovation, so an international partnership where 23 countries in the European Commission pledged to double their clean energy investments in innovation. At the same occasion, Bill Gates and a group of investors also announced their intention to drive innovation from lab to the market by investing long-term capital at unprecedented levels in the early stage tech development. So as part of Breakthrough Energy, you have $1 billion fund called Breakthrough Energy Ventures that we can talk about. But what I do and my job is really to think about where in the innovation cycle and where are some bottlenecks as you're trying to, as countries and companies are trying to scale and accelerate the clean technologies, and what are some innovative public-private partnerships or public-private-private partnerships that we can think of that can help unlock. So coming back to your question is, has the pandemic forced us to think differently about when and where to invest? I mean, in a lot of ways, it hasn't for us, because we very much have the prism of innovation and the importance it is to invest in clean energy innovation. But our thinking is, that one of the lessons of COVID-19 is that you need countries, and this Bill Gates talks a lot about this, you need countries to better anticipate and prepare what will happen in the future, which underlines really from the perspective of climate change that you need to invest in not just the technologies that we know today, but how do you invest in a way that can speed up in bringing down the cost differential between all of the technologies that we need for tomorrow, from jet fuels to low carbon steel to energy storage. So in a way, again, thinking about coming back to Robert's point in terms of the recovery packages, we're definitely seeing that as a great momentum to accelerate and to shorten the time frame that we would have to get us to net zero in 2050.
So turning then to Jenny here, you represent a big company. Do you also recognize what you're saying? Is the the rationale for investing in long-term innovation, is that the same now as it was, say, 2 years ago, or has it shifted your thinking?
Yeah, or maybe it makes even more sense, since, I mean, our customers, most part utilities, but also a lot of industry customers and also transport and infrastructure. Of course, some of our customers are in a challenging situation right now, but given the situation where we have electrification truly growing, both in Sweden and also other countries, I mean, we see a great potential that we are well positioned both right now and also forward. So what we need to do then is to invest now. I mean, if we can, we need to continue really to invest in both technology and in people to be positioned and to have the solutions for the requests that will come from Sweden here nationally, but also globally regarding this kind of technology. So I think it's important not to take a step back.
But have you in fact taken a step forward now then?
I think in the way that we sort of approach our customers and have the dialogue with our customers and also government and other actors, I would say for sure that we have taken a step forward, because we're a part of the solution now, and we also want to contribute, of course, to how we can do this in a very good way, how we can solve this in a better way going forward, with the recovery plans, etc. I mean, there we have a very clear role to play. So being there, discussing with all the partners and other players, that's what we need to do.
So this sounds, I think, great. But turning that to Anders, I know you raised this question around the level of spending on R&D in the energy sector for a long time, long before the pandemic. So what's your take on this? First, I guess the overall general picture, do we invest enough in R&D, and what can be done to increase it, and how will the pandemic perhaps affect strategies going forward, you think?
I think if you look at the R&D in the energy sector historically, at least from a national perspective in Sweden, there hasn't been a lot spent from the energy sector in R&D. But that's also a reason for that is actually that the whole energy system in Sweden, nationally, and in many other countries, has been built up during a period where it was invested with from different states. In Sweden, we were building up the hydropower, we were building up the nuclear power, we were building up the transmission grid in Sweden. That was not private capital. And then you have also created a system actually where the energy sector has also transferred that further on, so that we are we have been in a very good position. When we're now taking off to a renewable energy system and a renewable world, more or less, then you need to have more R&D also in the energy sector. But you need to have it combined with state financing, with the different, call it national program, with EU program, which can also contribute to actually that we are networking within different sectors and also cross different sectors. I think that is what's needed to go forward and also to invest enough in R&D, because I think that there is not a historical answer that we are investing enough. It's actually we are investing too little in R&D in the energy sector from that perspective.
So Julia, picking up on what Anders Egelrud of Stockholm Energy said, you work with a network of different actors. How do you see we can mobilize perhaps more and direct those resources to the right focus?
So, I mean, the challenge that we see is that we're talking about very deep tech sectors, right? We're talking about very capital intensive. Of course, it depends on which types of innovations you're looking at, but if you're thinking about the steel or the cement or the aviation fuels that you need, or hydrogen, I mean, these are very capital intensive. So from our perspective, it's thinking about, I think, to what Anders just mentioned, it's really about trying to combine public and private together, and at each step, how can you combine the risk taking that maybe public sector has more appetite to take compared to the private sector, and so how do you make sure that you develop the right type of financial programs or the right type of partnerships that can help de-risk some of those investments. One of the examples that we have is thinking a little bit about, we developed a partnership with the European Commission on the basis of a similar model that we have called Breakthrough Energy Ventures, but in this case it's Breakthrough Energy Ventures Europe. This is a public-private, it's not a public-private, sorry, it's a venture fund where 50 million comes from the European Commission, 50 million comes from Breakthrough Energy Ventures. And the idea here is really to provide seed capital venture fund funding for early stage research. That's an interesting public-private partnership where the idea here was to supply more private capital, more patient capital into the space at the early stages. But that doesn't mean that we don't need similar types of vehicles, you know, to address at the growth stage of a company or the infrastructure funds. So from the perspective where I'm coming from, we're looking at, again, what type of public-private collaboration, who do you bring into the ecosystem in order to make sure that type of innovation will succeed to market fast enough.
But do you think that, so where's the main barrier here? Is it the risk aversion of industry, or is it the gap on the lack of leadership from the government side, or perhaps both, or something else?
I think coming back from, we are in Europe, and just yesterday President von der Leyen's speech was quite extraordinary. I mean, going to 55% by 2030 and then having a whole continent pledge for net zero. For me, the vision is there. The challenge is more, how do you then market by market? Jenny, you were talking about the electrification scenario. That's something that took, again, a bit of time to develop and to get people to abide to that vision, and then the regulation comes thereafter. It's not one type of barrier that we have. It's sort of a combination of barriers. You know, again, I come back to the lack of patient capital or lack of sufficient capital for scale up, or uncertainty regarding demand. I mean, we're talking about innovations. In some case, again, not all of them, but the green premium, the cost differential is huge. So we need to address it at each time. You know, is it a market question? And do you need to create confidence on the demand side? Is it a validation question because that technology hasn't yet been proven? Or is it going to be because there's insufficient sectoral collaboration? Again, I think it's a combination of different elements, and then depending on the innovation or the technology you're talking about, one barrier will be bigger than another.
Jenny, do you recognize this?
Yeah, I absolutely recognize it, and especially like the part of already existing technology, which is quite new, and but it's still there, but we do not really make use of it out in the market because we do not have the legislation for it. We do not have the drivers for our customers to invest in the existing technology, the existing edge technology that is already there. And that is something that I want us to sort of enable and empower, that we also use the technology that we have and the technology that comes also tomorrow, of course.
So do you feel what you're saying is that you have a sort of suite of technologies that's quite market ready, but the demand is still not there, or the premium they need to charge is too high?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, take for instance in Sweden, regarding the grid and the model that we have when it comes to what the grid companies, the DSO, can invest in. I mean, you have the structure on what they get, the calculation rate from, etc. And it is not, comparable to, or it doesn't reflect sort of the new technology that is there yet. So that is for sure an example.
So that's one area that where we received quite a lot of questions on, on sort of level of investments in the grid in Sweden. And when you look at scenarios from research projects like this one, you see a huge need. Yeah. And of course, if we're going to invest that in the frontline technologies or yesterday's, it's going to make a big difference. Do you sort of see that there's a lack of leadership, for lack of a better word, from the Swedish TSO when they order stuff from you? Yeah, I mean, we of course it's something that we want to see more of, and I think that we need to be a bit brave to take steps to test new technology, because I mean the situation that we have right now, we have a high sense of urgency right now in Sweden when it comes to both transferring electricity, of course, from north to south and also to the city. So I think that we need to find forms quite rapidly so that we can make and try out technology that we know is there, and see how it works. And we do not do that enough, I would say. Robert.
Yes, I as far as I'm concerned, what we're talking about now are problems, challenges that are already existing before the pandemic. And if I think that what we need to do is to use the pandemic to see, to kind of leapfrog that discussion. Otherwise, we would just fall back into the same challenges, the same problems. Because what we need to realize, I think, that is actually key, is that governments, public, private actors, individuals, so citizens, have shown an extreme, determination and changed society very rapidly when it comes to functions. We've closed down economies, open economies, democracies, within a week or so around in Europe and around the world to some extent. That power, that power, we need to focus and use on the climate change crisis, because that is equally a big, or even more dramatic crisis actually. So what I think that this has shown is that we are able to actually make a change and make a transition, and make a huge step forward. We just need to apply it on the right questions and the right areas. And the other thing that the pandemic has shown us is that we need to discuss the risk-sharing model that we have between public and private, both in research and innovation, but also in how we actually invest and how we make a change. And I think that if we just slip back to the discussion we had before COVID and face the same problems and just on and on discuss that problems, we need to kind of avoid that situation.
So let me pick up on the first question and then hold that thought on the risk sharing and go to you, Mechthild, because you at the International Energy Agency, you've been quite vocal in sort of using similar messages as Robert Andrén of the Swedish Energy Agency just said, this being an opportunity and so forth. So I guess I got two questions here. One is, do you have good examples of countries that have already started in practice to use this opportunity, if there is one? And the second question is, regarding the EU speech that we heard from Ursula von der Leyen yesterday, that's a nice vision, but what about when unemployment figures start rising, and will that sort of Green Deal vision wane and be replaced by more short-term actions, do you think?
Yeah, thank you. On the first question, there are certainly a few good examples, and I agree we need to use that chance and momentum and don't go back to the pre-COVID discussion, because the situation has changed fundamentally. I mean, behavior has changed, and that is another question for how long and how long lasting, and what is the impact exactly of the behavioral change on climate change and reducing CO2 emissions. But from government policies, we saw a few good examples. I mean, living here in France, some of the government action, like the aviation and Air France bailout, had some conditions that, for example, they have to use synthetic fuels, they have to cut down on domestic flights. So the government can play a role in when they spend money to help industries, and aviation is an extreme example, because that was the sector which was probably the most down during definement. So there can be support for certain sectors under conditions to use either hydrogen or other new technology, or in that case synthetic biofuels, and change behaviors in replacing short flights with trains or other means. There is in major cities, Brussels, Paris, but hopefully also in Stockholm, as we cannot travel, we can't see, that bicycling and bike lines have been improved and increased, and it had an impact on the behavior and on how people move around. So I think there are a few good examples, and hopefully we will see more and can exchange those also from more broader. We have examples from Brazil and China also, how to go over it. And that links me to what the EU does. I think I agree what Julian said. It's amazing speech by von der Leyen, not because I'm a former Commission employee, but I think it gave a lot of vision. And I think what we need right now is a vision which will be then implemented by concrete steps. And the targets we have seen, targets can trigger investments, they can trigger changes. We saw it with the renewables, energy efficiency targets at EU level, which were much lower and earlier achieved than foreseen. So I think the speech yesterday and the money, frankly, the EU member states, it's not only the Commission, the EU member states have committed to 750 billion euros in that next generation money, and 30% or even more, 35% should go for the European Green Deal. So there's a lot of money on the table and a lot of action which will follow with climate law, with new debate on ETS, on energy efficiency, on renewables. And I think that gives a chance to lead for Europe. And one question maybe I have, because one thing President von der Leyen mentioned when she spoke about hydrogen and low carbon hydrogen and steel, she mentioned Sweden and the project, the demonstration project we all know well on hybrid. I would have a question to whoever is involved on that. What are the costs and how is it going in that way that the Swedish government in the COVID difficult situation also for budget, national budget, the costs of the hybrid project, but also I read that there is some resistance on the location. Will it be located where it's planned? And what about sharing the results, which is probably a broader question afterwards. But as it was mentioned, as an example by von der Leyen yesterday, how is that project going on and who will finance it and what will be the benefits? More broader than for Sweden.
I guess the only person in the room here who's directly involved, or at least slightly direct, is Robert Andrén, the Swedish Energy Agency. You've supported that project financially.
Yes, we have, and quite vast sums of money as well. It actually is moving along as planned. We had this inauguration or whatever you call it, where we started the whole pilot plant some weeks ago. And now there is a discussion on where the bigger demonstration plant should be situated. And that is linked to the grid situation in Sweden. Because what we see now is in the northern parts of Sweden, there is a lot of energy intense new industries and facilities being planned. We are, for instance, then financing a quarter of the hydrogen storage part of the pilot plant. And the other 3/4 is financed by the private sector, by Vattenfall, by SSAB and LKAB, the key actors in the whole project. But it's a shared venture in when it comes to financing, and I think it's quite a good balance between the public and the private money put into the project. But when you come to more, should we say, immature projects or innovations, there we have a slightly different situation where we have to look at that before it becomes reality, like in hybrid.
Jenny.
Yeah, I would just like to say that, I mean, this is one of the examples, and there's a reason that is highlighted in so many discussions and seminars, etc. I mean, it's because it's such a good example, because I think it's so important now when we are where we are, that we are brave enough to be determined and take also big bets. I mean, to put a lot of money into such a project. Of course, look at risks, of course, have the, I mean, to be sensible, but to decide, no, we believe in this, and if this succeeds, I mean, it would have a huge impact, because the fossil emissions right now from the steel industry is, of course, a very big part of the global emissions. So we have such a very good chance, so it would be so unfortunate if we didn't go for it. And I mean, now we have done that with the hybrid, and I really hope that the project will be successful going forward. And I think that if we find similar things, I mean, we should really just come together and be brave enough to go for the big bets. That's what I'm saying, because those can be game changers for sure.
So then that brings me, I think, a nice segue to Anders Egelrud, CEO of Stockholm Exergi. You've recently taken quite a big bet, I would say, into bioenergy CCS demonstration plant.
It's definitely a bet. We have set up a target that we will be a climate positive enterprise 2025. In order to make that happen, we need to create actually a large bio CCS plant. We need to secure the logistic, we need to secure the storage, and we need to interact with other sectors like the oil and gas sectors, which has the best opportunities to actually store the CO2. We need to interact with the transportation system. We need to interact with the public. We need to have the framework for the setup so that we can transport CO2 between different countries in Europe, which is not allowed today. We need to find also a market model actually, which actually can finance this setup in the long-term perspective. But in the short-term perspective, I'm totally convinced, because the potential only in Stockholm is 2 million tons. 2 million tons of negative CO2 emissions at a cost which are far, far below of more or less everything else. But it's so large money for a small company like us. We are small in comparison to the size which we can make the CO2 emissions decrease now. So we need to find a financing model also to create a full-scale plant in Sweden. And the good thing with this technology is that we will not increase the use of biomass. We will not increase the use of other resources. We only add one more advantage to an already existing system, which you mentioned, Jenny. We need to look at the existing system. We need to find ways of handling the existing system and create even more benefits on the existing system. And that's what actually we have as a very good advantage in Sweden. Of course, we have a lot of district heating in old cities. It's not only that we heat up the buildings, we actually secure the electricity capacity, which are the question today. It's not the energy, it's the capacity, which will be there at the right time. And it's also to also create a carbon sinks in cities, in urban areas. So I think this is so exciting to start with. But then your question, why do we take that decision? I think we take that decision because we can see that it's needed. We know that if we should actually reach the climate targets setting up in the Paris Agreement, we need also carbon sinks. And we need to start to create these carbon sinks in areas where it actually is possible. And we can see that the energy sector has actually good opportunity to do that. We have extremely good opportunity to do that. And then we have also, we need to take the responsibility to actually to show that this is possible. And this is possible not only in Stockholm, because if it's only in Stockholm we do it, it will not be a good way of creating, I'll call it a global positive trend. But we can see that this is possible in Norway. We need to collaborate with Norway. It's possible in Helsinki. It's possible in Copenhagen. It's possible in Germany. And that's why we think that this project is so vital for creating a massive European carbon sink. So that's the reason behind. And then looking forward, there is a lot of framework which needs to be in place. There's a lot of collaboration with the Energy Agency in Sweden. And there is a lot of collaboration which are needed between different sectors. So is it demanding? Absolutely. But I think the major risk is that we are not going for this opportunity. And we are creating it in very small parts, waiting too long and saying that we will do this after we have done the journey to actually do the electrification of the transport sector, or if we have done the electrification of the industry. But we need to do this at the same time.
So, so Julia Renaud at Breakthrough Energy is. I'm curious, is this sort of the type of initiative and the projects that you work with? And when Anders says he needs to find a new sort of financing model when they're going to scale this up, is that something that you work with as well, or is it different?
I mean, we're definitely in the same sort of line of thinking, whether or not that's exactly we are the right organization. There's definitely a genuine interest in trying to think about these issues. I mean, I just, before I come back to Breakthrough Energy, one of the other models that I think, Mestir, you point to hybrid, and Anders, you talk to the bio CCS, which is quite extraordinary and definitely what we need. I'm thinking of the Northvolt example that we have here that you have in Sweden, and what it took to get there. I mean, I'm thinking in terms of this idea of bringing all of the value chain actors together, the multi-sector, the financing, potentially also the skills and the education. I mean, what Europe created with the European Battery Alliance is, to me, what we need to be doing in multiple sectors. You know, having that facilitation, looking at, is it a supply issue? Is it an off-taker issue? You know, if you think about the issue we have with steel and hydrogen, you know, it's also led the Commission to be thinking about carbon contract for differences. How do you secure the price differential? Who pays for that price differential between the green steel and the traditional steel? For me, that type of model is the right one. And then, you know, how do you facilitate that type of model? Is it indeed Breakthrough Energy working with partners? We've been mostly working, again, trying to create that type of ecosystem. We've done a bit of that on the financing side. We're thinking of what we could be doing here in Europe to facilitate some of that. But I'd say it's really to the points that we've been that the other panelists have been mentioning. It's about pooling the financing in a way that allows actors who can't de-risk who want to de-risk. It's about bringing the technology providers at the table and to secure, again, the sort of the business case by bringing the buyers of the products there. And very much agree that this is not an effort that one company can do alone. I mean, I hear you very well on the bio-CCS. We've been hearing exactly the same thing when it comes to green hydrogen and making sure that there's a case, you know, around the Nordics, the Netherlands, the Belgium, Germany. You know, that's what you need, is you need that European approach, because the challenge is too big. And the opportunity is there. Again, from where I sit, you know, how do you have the European Commission is definitely, or the European project is there to be able to facilitate that in a way.
So, Jenny Larsson from ABB Powergrids, what sort of big bets, similar to what we hear from bio-CCS and hydrogen, do you see in your space and grids? Are there similar sort of big bets?
Yeah, but I mean, I work daily and meet customers that work with those projects. I mean, we both see them in the steel industry. We see discussions in the cement industry. We have, of course, the bio and oil industry, etc. So we see that in so many places. So, and I mean, what we do from my country is, of course, the electrification part and help them with that. But what we can do, because some of this, when we talk about electrification, we're talking about high consumptions of electricity. And of course, then we need the large grid, we need the transmission that is very efficient, etc., etc. But we also need, I mean, to optimize local, smaller systems, of course, where also technology makes, I mean, it's very important that works and that we bring that into the system. But just speaking of global and local, because I was thinking about this when Anders was talking, because those of us who have worked with district heating, I mean, we know, and others know as well, that I mean, you can really get so good results, and when you optimize systems also locally. So I think that we've discussed a lot of the global systems and the global frameworks, but it's very important also to enable local solutions, local collaborations where you optimize a local system and make that more resource efficient, greener, CO2 free, etc. So that's also a part of I mean, what you're supporting, of course, from the Swedish Energy Authority and what we need to do all over.
Yeah, Robert.
Yeah, and I think this is quite important because this is also an export opportunity for Swedish solutions, for Swedish companies, big and small ones, is that we can show a concrete result. This makes a difference. This makes a huge impact on decreasing climate emissions, but also it's economically and socially beneficial for the society, the local society. So if you have those concrete examples to share and show that it works, then you can adjust that, and actually it becomes a very good possibility of exporting these kind of solutions and the knowledge surrounding them, including legislation, to make it happen.
I want to bring that question to you, Mechtil Verstorff at the IEA. When you look at the Nordic countries from your perspective, what would you sort of see as a potential contribution from people in this room and the energy sector more generally, in terms of bringing action also outside of our borders? Is it true what Robert is saying, that there's an export potentially, or is it more just hybrids from a Swedish director?
I think Robert knows the IEA very well, so
I think you're muted now. Maybe that's yeah.
That saves me.
I'm
At
not
least we
muted.
can't
Can
hear
you
you.
me?
We can't hear him.
I haven't changed anything. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Mechtild.
We can't hear Julia either.
No?
I haven't changed
I
anything.
think you're heard outside. It's just us. We can't hear you. So please go ahead, Mechtil, and we'll just lip read.
Okay. I think what I said was Robert and yourself, Markus, you know the IEA very well, and we work very well with the Nordic countries. And what you have probably very much in advance, that you have a CO2 emission target, which is more ambitious than many of the other European countries, and even more internationally. So there is an advance in the Nordic countries, and I even see a bit of a competition who is net zero by 2045 or 40, or Denmark is earlier than Sweden or Finland, which might be a healthy competition. But overall, we see a lot of engagement. And on the other side, I think it's important for the Nordic countries to look outside, because the market is relatively small. So the European or international markets are certainly something for Nordic industry, for Nordic partners to look. So I know that Sweden, for example, is very active in the IEA, but also in mission innovation, in other fora. So I think what remains important for Nordic countries, not only to work with each other and have a Nordic market, but to go beyond that. And I think what mission innovation, IEA, in our analytical work and policy recommendation can certainly help to facilitate that. And the question would be what are the expectations from the Nordics or Sweden? What can we do more? Because we work with all our governments. We work very well. Sweden, the Nordic countries are very much advanced. So what more can we do in working together and make that clean energy transition net zero happening? And maybe one other point, because bioenergy and CCUS was mentioned. And I think we can only agree that when we speak net zero, there's a lot of focus, and rightly so, on electrification, renewables, energy efficiency, and so on. And that's really necessary and important. But we see more and more a momentum being net zero and extremely ambitious in the next decade, to look at the existing infrastructure. And I fully agree what Anders said, the BECCS, the CCS and CCU is coming in. And I'm happy to see that also coming in Sweden, because I think historically Norway has been very much advanced, and some other parts in the world. But Sweden, Germany, Denmark had been resistant. I mean, there was public acceptance issues many years ago when Vattenfall had a CCS project in Brandenburg in Germany, which they withdrew. So I think there's a change to work more on net zero, on negative emissions, and with heavy industries. And that is, I see, a positive sign, and that I think it's good to share with others.
Thanks, Mechtil. I want to. One thing that keeps coming back here is the sort of long-term vision of net zero. And to me, sometimes there's a discrepancy between that sort of perspective and the investment horizon, in especially private companies. So a question to, I guess, Anders Egelrud and Jenny Larsen, just quickly, what are the sort of time perspectives you use when you invest in R&D and deployment of new technologies? What's the sort of payback time that needs to be there for you to take that bet? Starting with you, Jenny.
I mean, both short term and long term, so a balance in between. But not only, I mean, one important factor is to not do everything ourselves. Of course, we have globally, we have 38,000 employees, and of which 2,000 are in R&D. That's a lot of resources, of course, and a strong workforce, but we need to work with others. We need to partner up and not do everything on our own. Both other large players, large actors, but also scale up companies, startup companies, etc. So we work very much also with such companies to bring in innovation that is a win-win for both us and that startup or scale up. So that's one part of it.
Anders?
Of course, when we are investing in the energy sector, it's long-term perspective we are usually familiar with. It's 25 years when you are investing in a combined heat and power plant, if you are investing in a transmission grid or things like that. But when we are going into this sector also, you need at least to find a way to finance and secure the investment 10 years ahead. Otherwise, it's very risky. I mean,
But can you do that yourself, or is it somebody else, like Julia Renault, who needs to provide that capital?
That's what I hope I would like to emphasize. When we are creating the first bio CCS, for instance, in the European Union, you need actually to have a financing which are mostly public, because you don't have the market model in place, and we need to create the market model parallel with starting up these kind of facilities. Otherwise, it will take too long time. So that's it's not impossible for at least a single individual company to take the whole risk of this huge step, I would say it is. So then when we look at the investment from securing it in a long-term perspective, I think we have a long horizon. I think this is valid for 25 years ahead, and it will be used for 25 years ahead. But we need to be secure, more or less, that we can finance it, we can operate it, and we will not lose money after 10 years still.
Is this what you mean when you say patient capital, Julia Renaud, Breakthrough Energy?
The patient capital is actually more for when you're thinking about companies and venture funding, and I can talk a little bit about the way Breakthrough Energy Ventures thinks about that. But to come back to your point, Anders, I very much agree. I mean, the question is at those very large scale projects that are first of a kind demonstration, which types of capital do you need to bring? And I very much agree with you that it's, the public sector has a huge role to play there. I think in terms of grant funding, you can also think in the US, there are models around philanthropic funding also, thinking about first of a kind demonstration. And then I think there's also not just the sort of cash element, but there's the risk element, and the EIB, we've been, in the partnership we have with the European Commission, the EIB is there, and they have a number of first loss instruments where the first loss is actually on the public side. So I hear you very much in terms of what is the role, if you will, again, in terms of public institutions at that stage, with the understanding, of course, that the private sector then comes in, and of course, very much a big hope that the next will require less funding from the private sector, from the public sector, and more upscaling of the private sector, the financing. And that's really when you think about the cost trajectories that you would get. That first plant will cost a lot of money, but then hopefully the learning curve brings both the technology cost and the cost of operations lower. What I talk about when we talk about patient capital is, again, we're talking about sort of deep tech, where the development cycles are more in the range of 20 years. So some of the companies that Breakthrough Energy Ventures has invested in, those technologies are not yet going to see the light of day. They're still at the research stage. What you need is to be able to have an investor that is patient, in the sense that it's not going to ask for a return on investment in 3 years or in 6 years. Breakthrough Energy has a model where indeed the level of patience in terms of when it expects a return that is much more significant than what we see in terms of other venture funds. The other particularity with Breakthrough Energy Ventures, it starts with the science. So they have a big science and technology team, and the mark is, will you qualify? It's across all 5 sectors, agriculture, power, transportation, industry, and buildings. And it's at scale, the technology has to be part of a family that can reduce 1% of greenhouse gas emissions in 2050. So we're talking about very selective, we're thinking about direct air capture or those types of technologies that's where, again, Breakthrough Energy Ventures is mostly in that space.
Robert and then Anders.
Yes, I think this is very important discussion because, what we see today is also that the signals coming from the players, the actors out there is very important. When we see big investment firms like BlackRock and we see our Swedish pensions funds coming out and actually saying that sustainability will be much more what we require, what we will put demands on, then we have something that is starting to get could be very positive, because then you have to also look at, of course, the horizon of what the payback time, so to say. So I think that there are things going on at the moment that could facilitate this. But then again, when you have a pandemic like now, and when the private R&D is kind of, frozen more or less, then the public needs to step in and bridge that temporarily, so we keep the level of R&D at least on the same levels as before the pandemic. I think that is very important. And that is also a long-term bridge, in the sense that we cannot then, when the private capital is coming back and the private R&D is coming up to normal levels or even more, then you need to add it on, so you don't kind of withdraw as the public sector. And then another thing that I think is very important, listening to you, we are all in the energy sector, we all know about this. It is actually, we need to be a bit humble that it's very difficult for many actors, small actors, companies, startups, to find the way forward in this jungle of actors. So I think we need to be much better in finding matchmaking platforms.
Thanks. Anders?
Yeah, I was actually coming back a little bit to the financing, and the financing with the business model which we are looking for now is that there are no price for negative carbon sinks. We have polluter pays principles, and I really support that principle. I think that should be valid, and I think that should be also emphasized, and we can withdraw emission rights in the European Union, and we can increase the speed of phasing out fossil fuels. It has been very successful, and I think we are one example of that. We have phased out the fossil fuels very rapidly, and that's, of course, polluter pays principle and fossil taxes which has made that possible. But when we are looking for carbon sinks, then we need to create a price for something which also are a decrease of emissions below zero. And there I think it's really, really important to find out a framework. And also that framework needs to allow bilateral trading, actually, maybe between different sectors, so that also sectors like Microsoft, for instance, or others, they can actually also create an own system where they also not only compensate for their existing emissions, they also can look in an even more advanced way of the historical emission they have made and actually compensate for them. And so this system for carbon sinks needs to be a little bit looking at giving opportunities for carbon sinks to be traded with, but also financing the model in the beginning for setting up the facilities. And then in the long-term perspective, I think that the market model will be there. But that's a jumpy road, and I think the regulation from European Union in this sector is crucial that we have it in place. Ratification of carbon sinks, for instance, that we can transport CO2. It might sound like a small thing, but 7 countries of 53 has agreed upon the ratification of the London Protocol. We need actually 48 more. So it's a journey. I think the journey has a tendency of taking too long time. So I think this is really important.
So we're coming in close to our finish time at 2, and I wanted to spend a couple of minutes on a technology or a carrier that's on many people's lips now. That's hydrogen. So, and I want to start with you, Mechtil Berstoff at the IEA. You've done quite a lot of work on hydrogen at the IEA over the last few years. So, starting with the broad question, what role do you see for hydrogen in the European energy system, to start with that, over, say, the next 15 years?
Hydrogen, I think we have never seen so many strategies, not only in Europe, by the way. Japan and other parts of the world are also having Chile hydrogen strategies. So there's a good momentum. But right now, hydrogen is 90% based on fossil fuels. So in order to have low carbon hydrogen, either we invest more in renewables and green hydrogen, or, and I think that links well what Anders was saying, we have to capture CO2. We have to link hydrogen with CCS or make sure that their CO2 emitted are captured and stored or used somewhere else. So I think we see at the IEA, and we have looked at costs and so on, and we will, by the way, continue doing that. I think hydrogen will be one of our flagship also in the future. So we see a good momentum for hydrogen, but we need absolutely make sure that, for example, it's the same for CCS, that partners go together, because it's still kind of not there, and we need several players together. We need hydrogen and CO2 infrastructure, which is not there. We need storage places for, that's more for CCS. And then we need countries to invest money. And what the EU is right now planning, because there's also new hydrogen strategies, which is extremely ambitious, we probably need regulations and standards in the future. So the hydrogen, I think there is a future, whatever color it is. It can be green, blue, whatever, pink is something, but it's a carrier we can use. Also, it's not one technology. We can use it in different end-use transport, heavy duty, or in industry. So there's a future if the right environment is there, and companies and governments like Sweden are ready to join other forces and make the projects to bring the costs down. The basic thing is that the costs of clean or green hydrogen or decarbonized hydrogen is still very, very high right now. So, but there's a good momentum. I think we will force that further because so many countries are now investing it. So I think over time that will certainly bring part of the net zero. It's only a part of it in certain sectors. We need other technologies as well.
So is this an example of, we heard Anders speaking here about more, I guess, government leadership, and we can't really wait for the current market, if I get you correctly, to pick these sort of big technologies up. So is hydrogen an example of where we actually need a sort of common European huge push?
Absolutely. So, the first thing, the Hydrogen Alliance, which is now being set up, I think it's an alliance of different players. I think that's the first step to do. And I think the willingness and the momentum is absolutely there. The question is how to bring the cost down. Otherwise, I think it's has been a momentum 20 years ago. So we really need to concentrate on projects, but also getting together and making it a priority. And that is now the right framework, because it's giving priority everywhere.
Robert, do you want to weigh in? What's the Energy Agency thinking around hydrogen in Sweden?
No, I think it's important that I believe that there could and should be a European Union common push, but it has to be on some kind of a meta level, because we are so different countries. Hydrogen will play such a different role in the countries depending on where you start. And I mean, in Sweden we can have green hydrogen. But then again, it's not perhaps then so important for us to have the same infrastructure that they will need to have or build or secure in Germany or in Netherlands, where you don't have the green hydrogen. You have to have other solutions, blue hydrogen or whatever. So I think that as long as the EU common approach is not something that limits to certain areas, or limits the way countries can use hydrogen in their own energy systems. So that's the only thing I think is important at the moment to watch out for.
Okay, very quickly, Anders.
I think you need to look at hydrogen from I think it's a very interesting area. And if you look at the possibilities we have, for instance, in Sweden, we have a potential of creating 30 million tons of bio-CCS. If you create 30 million tons of bio-CCS, you don't need to create that as a carbon storage. You can create tremendous a lot of actually CO2, which can be utilized together with hydrogen and create other fuels for global sectors. And that will be actually a very huge trend for.
So the
for
combination of
yes.
bio-CCS and hydrogen, that's
think
what you're after.
You need to look at this as a small puzzle bits, pieces which you have put together, and then you have made a better system.
All right, we're very close to finishing up here, so I want to give the word to you, Robert, and perhaps ask you to change hats here to as the chair of the NEPP project. So what can you reflect on this conversation? That NEPP is a very long-term project. We've been around for 20 years, and we have a perspective going beyond 2050. What can you sort of take home with you after this session?
I think that one thing is that this is not a challenge that someone can solve on its own or in splendid isolation. It's a co-creation, it's a teamwork. That's the first of all. I think that is quite clear when it comes to scale up the solutions. The other thing is that we need to have systemic solutions. I think that would be even more important. And then we have to look at the local level as well as the global level in a way. But for the NEPP project, I think that what we need to secure is the long-term perspective, identify the key areas for research. And then I think that we need to look into behavioral research, business models, alongside with new technologies and technique developments. So I think the challenge for the NEPP is that we can find this on the Nordic level to start with, and also to identify the key areas for a long-term research project.
Well, thanks a lot. And with that, thank you so much for joining us for this panel. Of course, our guests, most of all, you're in Paris. Thanks for coming in. And thank you to all of you who've been watching and submitting questions and comments. Please look out for other events on our website. There's going to be other events this fall. And see you next time. Thanks a lot.